I grew up in a very conservative evangelical congregation, almost fundamentalist, if you know what that is. They had the same problem back in the 60s and 70s when I grew up as we do today in the church. They managed it differently than we do today. And of course, we manage it differently than they did back then. Like the Pharisees of Jesus' day, the Pharisees liked to build fences around God's law to kind of help people not break the law. In other words, they had to work harder at breaking God's laws and God's rules if there was a fence around them. And the fences were more cultural and more society-oriented things that were meant to block you a little bit. And when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of that going on in the church. Try to keep people pure and holy. Let me show you a couple examples of that. First of all, if you did not go to church when there was a revival service, and we used to have revival services 2 or 3 times a year, and they'd go all week, and if you didn't go to every revival service, you were not probably a very good Christian. Now that's interesting, because if you need revival, it's usually because you're not a very good Christian. You don't go to revival services if you don't need them. But that was part of the imagery of the church at that time. There was another one that we did that was very interesting. We didn't let guitars or drums in our church because that looked like rock and roll. That looked like those sinners who recorded that vile music on the AM radio bands. Yeah, some of it was pretty bad music, but you can use anything for God's glory if you're willing to. But they didn't want that imagery. I hope you're seeing that. Another one, which is a little bit frank, was the length of a girl's dress had to be below her knees and hopefully down close to her ankles. There was a reason for that. Number one, it was to teach her modesty, whatever that was. Number two, it was to keep the young men, like me, from looking and lusting and committing fornication or adultery or whatever it would be. Well, that didn't work either. In fact, most of the girls, when they weren't under direct supervision, broke the rule themselves because they wanted the boys' attention. In that same vein was, as good evangelical Protestant boys, we weren't allowed to date Catholics because that was like dating the devil's daughters. There was a line in the sand strongly between Catholics and Protestants, and it was really a big line in the sand. I remember one time I dated a Jewish girl one time, and my parents thought that was really great because Jews are God's chosen people. And I don't know if they really realized that so are Christians. In fact, that's why we all come to faith the same way, whether we're Jews or Greeks or Italians or Germans or Polish. Interesting as it is, that's the way it worked, and it was mainly image oriented. Today, we deal with it quite differently. We don't care. We just open the doors up for the culture. Come on in. We want people to be comfortable. And that means we make church out to be like a dinner and the show. It means that we have all the amenities of the world. Stores, bookstores, we have coffee shops. We have just about everything you can imagine, from gymnasiums to wild-eyed fancy kids' playrooms. And you know what? None of that in its own right is evil, but it's there for the wrong intent. And that's where it gets really interesting. We dress casually, and I'm not saying you have to dress up to go to church. That's not what I'm saying at all. We don't have revivals, and we probably need to have revivals, but that isn't the answer either. What the answer is we need to go back to the spiritual roots that are found in the scriptures in that early church and really live out what Christ wanted the church to be. And that's hard to do. See, a lot of people are starting home churches, but most of them, the vast majority, are just microcosms of a big church. And that doesn't do anything. Here's why. When you come in a room together and you're facing each other, you're vulnerable, and you can help each other. There's no kingpin guy that makes all the rules and sets the stage. There might be a leader, but we're there to help and serve and love each other and teach each other by our lives who Jesus Christ is and the application of that. You see, when we come together in a Romanized sanctuary, which is what 99% of them are, we can sit down and hide behind the person in front of us. And that's exactly what the problem is. We hide our sin. Today we do it by inviting the culture to come in and just be like us, and we'll be like them, and everybody will feel good. Back in the day when I grew up, we did it by imagery. We wanted to look good on the outside, and we wanted to be different, and we wanted to be identifiable in a certain way. God is not concerned with all of that. God wants our hearts. And when we're willing to quit hiding behind other people, when we're willing to quit hiding our sin and really be who we're supposed to be and let Christ live in us, we're going to make a difference in the world, and we will become the real church.